The idea of the UFC founders was to identify the most effective fighting style in Ultimate Fighting, which became Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, represented by Royce Gracie. At the very first tournament there was a place for the sumo wrestler Teila Tuli, for whom everything ended with kicked out teeth and a knockout from Gerard Gordeau in just 26 seconds. So for the whole clan of sumo wrestlers, it wasn't the most pleasant evening. Today we will recall the brightest sumo fights in MMA and see how effective the discipline in real combat. Fedor, for example, didn't make it in sumo, unlike mixed martial arts. Let's see what happens to sumo wrestlers in MMA. Let's start with Emmanuel Yarbrough, who was nicknamed Manny and got into the Guinness World Records as the heaviest athlete. At the UFC 3 tournament, he was opposed by Keith Hackney, a white tiger-style fighter who made a gorgeous scramble out of Johnson's balls and then finished with the most brutal move in MMA history, which I would call an underpants choke. Keith, in the first seconds of the fight, drops Yarbrough with his palm, but Emmanuel grabs him in his clamps and throws him out of the cage. Hackney cycles nicely and waits for his chance, which soon came. He dropped the giant again and began to beat him brutally on the ground. If I didn't miss anything, Keith landed 41 punches to the head of the poor sumo wrestler. That is where Mario Yamasaki probably got his inspiration. The wildest beating of Yarbrough and the victory for Keith, who after this battle was nicknamed the Giant Killer, and as we can see, he perfectly broke not only eggs but also huge sumo wrestlers. Emmanuel's career continued in Japan at the shooter tournament with karateka Tatsuya Nakano as a rival. This time Emmanuel didn't repeat mistakes of the past and immediately squeezed the poor fellow into a corner and then took him to the ground. Further, Nakano met really hard times. Emmanuel covered him with his entire mass and, blocking the oxygen, forced the Japanese to tap by making a choke in the literal sense of the word. Another truly unique and one-of-a-kind submission by Yarbrough. 2 months later, Emmanuel again steps into the ring, this time at the Pride 3 tournament, and his rival was Japanese Koji Takata, for whom it was the debut in mixed martial arts.
Go for it's like, I think, or a triangle choke.
Takashi's plan for the battle was simply ingenious. He was running around the giant for the entire first round and hoping for vertigo since there was a minimum of fighting. Emmanuel was so tired that if there was a bench in the ring, it would definitely be useful for him. In the second round, the Japanese unexpectedly died for the giant's leg and the fight went to the ground. Yarbrough was laying down on Takashi's leg and hoped that would be enough, but he failed. Koji freed his leg, got out from under the opponent, and with a series of blows to the head, made the sumo wrestler tap. Manny's last fight in MMA turned out to be a little bit boring, but with a dashing finale, after which he ended his career and didn't perform anymore. Now let's remember the most interesting sumo wrestler, Japanese Koji Takata, the one who was knocked out by the Mongolian fighter in the movie The Quest with Jean-Claude Van Damme. The Japanese achieved serious regalia by becoming Yokozuna. This is the highest rank in sumo. He is also the prototype of a sumo wrestler for some video games from the 90s. In 1996, Koji decided to try his hand in real fights and went to the Vale Tudo tournament, where he got the Brazilian fighter Pedro Otávio as his opponent. By Kitao's efforts, the fight quickly passed to the ground, but Koji was so passive and kind there that Pedro decided not to beat him, but to kill him. The Brazilian crawls out from under the massive sumo wrestler and then begins ramming with his 12-6 elbows right to the back of the head. Koji tapped, but Otávio behaved like a fabulous athlete, and in addition to a couple of 3 extra elbows, steps on a bitten opponent when he got to his feet, so a moment of justice just suggests itself.
Knockout, knockout, это knockout.
A month later, Kitao signed up for the UFC 9 tournament, and his rival was Mark Hall, nicknamed Cobra, who represented the fancy style of Muay Do.
It is like becoming an all-pro or what we...
Mark approaches and punches a weighty slap in the face of the sumo wrestler and then flees. Koji catches up with Hall at the net and transfers him to the ground, but when he gets closer, Mark hits him right to the nose and blood gushed like a river. Even at that tough time, a broken nose was enough to stop the fight and award Hall the victory. By the way, perhaps we just saw the very first stoppage of the battle by doctors in the history of UFC. But if someone remembers a case that happened even earlier, write in the comments in which battle it happened. At this tournament, punching to the face and head strikes were prohibited. With these bans, politicians vote against human cockfights, and before the tournament, all fighters were threatened with arrests for violating those rules. The only thing they miscalculated was that the old school fighters had massive balls and bad hearing. The tournament was held in the usual bloody mode, and after that, no one was arrested. There was also a third fight in Koji's career, the first Pride tournament in which Royce Gracie finished Takata, and Koji's rival was Nathan Jones, the very warrior that was killed by Achilles. Nathan starts out with a roundhouse and a high kick, but then falls into the hug of a sumo wrestler and flies to the canvas. From the time of his first fights, Koji seems to have learned a thing or two. Instead of lying down on the ground, he gives Jones the Americana and makes him surrender. These emotions show how important this victory is for Kitao, who was finally able to win for the third time. But unfortunately, on this, he ended up with fights and didn't perform anymore. Another fighter who we cannot ignore is Alan Karayev, a sumo wrestler from Russia who is 5 times world champion in sumo and 7 times in arm wrestling. Alan had his first fight in 2005 against Big Daddy Gary Goodridge, who was in a great shape, and out of the last 9 fights he lost only to Fedor. Of all fighters on our list, Alan was the most dangerous, and he showed it from the very first seconds when he moved Daddy to the canvas and made the bottle opener. But then Gary managed to get out from under a more massive opponent, took side control, and pressed Alan's Adam's apple with his forearm. It seemed to me that Karayev tapped already in this episode, but the fight was stopped a little later when Alan tapped for the second time. So the debut turned out to be not the best, but Karayev didn't stop there, and after 4 months he signed up for a fight with Bob Sapp, who at that time hadn't yet merged fights, and had 6 victories and 2 losses in his pocket. Uncompromising exchange at the beginning of the fight, after which Alan takes Bob down and takes the full mount. A long-lasting rumble on the ground, and each of the fighters was already on the mount twice, but no one could get at least some benefit from this. Then the referee freaked out and lifted the fighters to their feet. 2 oncoming jabs from Bob and Alan was knocked out. So the second fight in MMA for Karayev was unfavorable. But he didn't stop there as well and still managed to win 2 victories out of 5 fights in his career. Well, lastly, let's recall another Yokozuna Akibono Taro, who was the most active sumo wrestler in MMA and even tried his hand in K1, although it all ended with a record of 8 defeats and 1 victory by decision. December 2004 and K1 Premium Dynamite Tournament. Akibono enters the fight with the pioneer of MMA and the champion of the first UFC tournaments, Royce Gracie. The first rapprochement and Gracie is on his back, but instead of submitting attempt, he hurries to retreat and gets to his feet. Royce hits Akibono and the fighters are down again, but this time Gracie is much more active. Royce makes an omoplata and finishes Akibono in just 2 minutes, thereby returning to the winning streak, which ended literally in the next fight. Well, Akibono himself didn't calm down on this and spent 3 more fights in MMA. He lost by decision to Bobby Olagan by submission to Don Fry, and then had an epic match with Giant Silva, for whom this victory was one of 2 Kimuras in his career. Interesting fact is that his second Kimura was made to another sumo wrestler, Henry Armstrong. And these were the most famous sumo fights in MMA. Although none of them have ever claimed the highest places and titles, but with the entry of these big guys into the ring, some special charm was added to the battles, which unfortunately is now sometimes not enough. So if you like this video, then your likes and comments can help to promote it. And also, who is not subscribed, subscribe and press the bell to be in touch, and not to miss new videos.